Hello students, welcome to the channel. In this video, we discuss the first passage, the literature passage of the May 2021 International SET. Over the next couple of videos, we'll be solving the entire reading test one by one. I've already uploaded the solutions for the writing and the math sections, which I'll link to in the description box. So be sure to check those out. This passage is adapted from Robertson Davies, What's Bred in the Bone. Frank Cornish is a young boy in Canada during World War I. Frank's life was not at all dark. He was not clever at school, but he attracted Miss McGladdery's attention by the seriousness with which he applied himself in the weekly half hour that was given to art. Miss McGladdery taught art as she taught everything, and she instructed all three classes at once in the mysteries of drawing a pyramid and shading one side of it so that it appeared to have a third dimension, or as she put it, the shaded side went back and the unshaded side stuck out. A pyramid and a circle which shading made into a ball, and as the culmination of art, an apple. Shading was done by scuffling down one side of the object with the flat of the pencil's point. But Frank did not think that was good enough. He had learned a craft at home in which shading was done with tiny parallel lines, achieved with great patience and even by cross-hatching. So this introduces the passage. It's about a boy called Frank, and the setting is Canada during the First World War. And the first paragraph introduces Frank and his school, his time at school, especially the fact of his art class, right, which is taken by one Miss McGladdery. And this is something that is especially important to Frank. He applies himself with all seriousness during art class. And the passage also describes the way Miss McGladdery teaches, right? Her approach to art, you know, how she gets students to make drawings and how Frank looks at that. If you take the time to do all that tic-tac-toe on your apple, you won't be finished by 4 and you'll have to stay in till it's done, said Miss McGladdery. So he did stay in with half a dozen other culprits who had work to finish before they were released for the weekend. And when he showed Miss McGladdery his apple at 4:30, she admitted reluctantly that it was all right, for she did not want to encourage the boy to be fancy and try to go beyond what the class demanded and what she herself knew. So this refers to this shading technique that Frank employed, something that was different from what he had been taught by Miss McGladdery. And because it involved drawing parallel lines, it took more time than what he had been taught. And so he stayed back and he finished it. And it was 4:30 when he finished it. And Miss McGladdery had to admit that he had done a good job, but she did not want to encourage him too much because she wanted him to kind of follow what the class did. Frank could draw, which was something not required in art, and Miss McGladdery had come upon a caricature of herself done in the back of his arithmetic workbook. Miss McGladdery, who was a fair-minded woman, except about religion and politics, and had no vanity, admitted to herself that it was good, so she said nothing about it. Frank was an oddity, and like a true Scot, Miss McGladdery had a place in her approval for a chill Opat's beds, so long as he did not go too far. So here we learned that Frank was actually drawing at other places. He had drawn a caricature of the teacher at the back of his arithmetic notebook. And Miss McGladdery had not raised it with him because she had actually found the drawing to be good, right? And like a true Scot, the passage tells us she had a place for the maverick, right? So the thing is, an expression like kill or pets is something that you may not know, and that is okay. But you can understand from the context that she looks upon Frank as an oddity. It says in line 36 that he was an oddity, he was eccentric, but she still had place for him in her mind, in her heart. So you can know that this expression would refer to somebody who is somewhat eccentric. Almost every Saturday, Frank could escape into a world of imagination by going to the matinee at the McCrory Opera House, where movies were shown. He got in for nothing because the girl at the ticket office recognized him, and as he pushed his 10-cent piece across the little counter, she winked and quietly pushed it back again. Then inside and into his favorite seat, which was on the aisle at the back, he did not crowd into the front rows as did the other children. Riches unfolded, an episode locally pronounced episode of a serial in which every week a noble cowboy was brought to the point of a horrible death by remorseless villains who sought to rob him of the equally noble girl he loved. Of course, it all came out right at the end of episode 12, and then another great adventure was announced for the weeks to follow. After the serial, a hilarious comedy, sometimes about the Keystone comedy cops who were as incapable of dealing with disaster as the girl in the serial. So this describes this other interest of Frank's, where he um, every Saturday he goes to the McCrory Opera House where he watches the matinee show, and there is a kind girl at the counter who lets him in, and then inside, he, along with other people, but he takes a seat at the back. He watches these riches, which is implying, he is completely immersed in the experience. It is something that is mesmerizing to him. It is something that is immersive, and he watches these, serialized versions of stories. Okay, Frank had an eye for the movies that took in more than the action. He saw backgrounds, landscapes, many of them painted if you looked carefully, and angles. He even saw light. It was to his grandfather, the senator, that he owed this extension of his understanding, for the senator was an amateur photographer. His techniques were not sophisticated in terms of the Great War period when Frank was so often his companion. He worked with a large box camera and a tripod. With this load, he trudged happily around Blair Logie, taking pictures of the town and such of its more picturesque citizens as he could persuade to stand or sit still for the necessary number of seconds. And he drove out to the lumber camps from which his growing fortune flowed and took pictures of the men at work or standing by giant trees lying on their sides. He took pictures in his mills. He took pictures of young Blair Logie men who were going off to war with their rifles and kit and gave copies to their families. The senator never thought of himself as an artist, but he had an eye for a picture, and he was an enthusiastic pursuer of all the many sorts of light the Canadian seasons afford. He talked to Frank about it as if the boy were of his own age. His senatorial and grandparental aloofness quite disappeared on these expeditions in search of what he called sun pictures. Okay, so here we are introduced to Frank's grandfather, who himself is interested in the play of light, as Frank is, because he's an amateur photographer. And while his day job is as a logman, he runs a mill where logs are the raw material. He is something who has taken to photography with gusto. He takes pictures of all sorts of things. He takes pictures of men going off to war. He takes pictures of men working at the mill. He takes pictures of the changing light that the seasons afford. And he has this companionship with Frank, where during these sojourns, during these trips, he almost treats him as a friend and not as a grandchild. It's all a question of the light, Frank, he said repeatedly. The light does it all. And he explained that all that painstaking shading in art was related to light, something which certainly had never occurred to Miss McGladdery. Okay, so we also see this kind of contrast inbuilt in the passage, something that Frank thinks of between his grandfather and Miss McGladdery. So even though Miss McGladdery is the art teacher, and even though she's supposed to encourage this kind of spontaneity in creation in classroom, She is a little more staid. She's a little more, somebody who follows the straight path and wants things to be done a certain way, the way that she's comfortable with. While Frank's grandfather, who is actually not an artist, who is only an amateur photographer, he kind of, is a truer artist. If art were to indicate being free to explore opportunities. So he's a truer artist because he actually knows how to play with light, and he actually understands how that can make a good picture. So there is also this sort of kind of comparison between Miss McGladdery and the grandfather. Okay, question one. Let's just which statement about Frank's attitude towards drawing can most reasonably be inferred from the passage? He believes that his creativity will earn him special recognition from others. He is committed to his work regardless of the diligence it requires. He accepts the fact that while he is talented, he must still strive to improve. He pursues his interest in art because it gives him a rare chance to excel. So it's B, right? Because we know that in that episode where he wanted to shade using parallel lines, he was not able to finish it at the end of the art class, and he had to stay back after school to finish it. So he was willing to do that because he wanted to finish his work. So his commitment, comes through there. Which choice provides the best answer for the best evidence? This part, right? He did stay in with half a dozen other culprits. So I would say that's line 22 onwards. Oh, okay, that's not an option. So let's look at 1 to 4. I'll just mark these first and then we'll look at 5 to 10. Okay. 12 to 14 and 14 to 18. 12 to 14 and 14 to 18. Okay. Frank's life was not at all dark. He was not clever at school, but he attracted Miss McGladdery's attention by the seriousness with which he applied himself to the weekly half hour that was given to art. So I think this could be an answer because the seriousness could refer to his commitment. Miss McGladdery taught art as she taught everything, and she instructed all 3 classes at once. Okay, this is about her teaching. Shading was done by scuffing down. Yeah, and then the Frank's method. Yeah, so A is the best answer because that talks about his commitment. Which choice best describes the passage? A lasting effect of a meaningful interaction between 2 characters is analyzed. The influence of a character's early experiences with art on his later life is examined. A character's early experiences with art in school and outside of school are described. The perspective of a young character is contrasted with those of 2 adult characters. Okay, so I think it's C, right? Because the passage is basically about Frank's experiences with art at school under Miss McGladdery and with his grandfather outside, right? Option A, there is no meaningful interaction per se, right? There is no one scene that brings out this interaction. It's more of a general trend of what he experiences in school and outside. So A is not right. The influence of a character's early experiences with art on his later life. We don't hear about Frank's later life, so B is wrong. The perspective of a young character is contrasted with those of 2 adult characters. So I don't think we get into the perspectives of the adult characters so much, right? I know that we hear a little bit about what Miss McGladdery thinks, but that's what the narrator describes, she thinks, right? It's not really her perspective, right? Similarly, I know that we hear about what his grandfather does. Yeah, and I think the idea of the perspective of 2 adult characters contrasting with a young person completely eliminates, that option completely eliminates art, which is a central idea of passage. So that also uh, is a reason that D is not the best answer. So I'll go with C in this case. The passage suggests which similarity between Frank's grandfather and Miss McClattery. Though they attempt to instruct Frank about art, they sense that Frank is reluctant to heed their advice. Though they conduct themselves modestly, they privately take great pride in their accomplishments. Though they enjoy teaching, they ultimately prefer their own artistic pursuits to helping others. Though they engage in artistic activities, these activities do not define their identities as professionals. So this is obviously true for the grandfather, right? Uh, I don't think it's true for the teacher because the teacher is an art teacher, right? So it's not D. Uh, okay, I know that Frank is reluctant to heed the teacher's advice. I know that, she senses that because, for example, the way he does shading is not what she taught. Is he reluctant to heed his grandfather's advice? Um, he talked to Frank about it. Yeah, I don't think he senses that Frank is reluctant to seek his advice, right? Um, yeah, so I'm not sure of A either. Okay. Though they conduct themselves modestly, they privately take great pride in their accomplishments. Okay, is that correct? Is this evidence-based? No, okay. Uh, I don't think that's true. Miss McGladdery certainly does not take. I don't think C is a good answer because uh, it's not about teaching. I think it will be A though. I think A is the best answer. I'm only trying to find evidence for the grandfather sensing that Frank is reluctant. It was to his grandfather that he owed this extension of his understanding. With this load, he trudged happily and he drove out to lumber camps. He took pictures in his mills. Boy, is okay. Yeah, I don't think it's A either. I'm not sure of this question actually. Though they engage in, isn't mm, right, right. Yeah, I think D then because she was teaching everything right in the school. As she taught everything else, right? So it wasn't her chief identity, right? Yeah, so D then. Okay, this was a good question. I hope I'm right. Let me see. Yeah, because that was not her chief identity, is what is said. Okay, so the author's use of the phrase riches unfolded has the main effect of. So that refers to the time he spends in the matinee, right? This time, something that he enjoys greatly, emphasizing the complexity of the movie's plot lines and characters, conveying Frank's delight in the movie shown at the theater, contrasting Frank's reaction to the movies with that of the other children, suggesting the care taken by the theater staff. So it's his delight, right? The fact that he gets completely immersed. As used in line 54, right nearly means 54. Okay. Of course, it came out right at the end of episode 12. So this refers to how the plot had this noble cowboy who was always at risk of getting killed by the villains. because they, because they wanted to take away his girl and he wanted to protect her. But it came out right, as in, everything ended well, right? So it came out right. It came out favorably, right? There was a favorable outcome. It was a positive outcome. It's not precise or reasonable. We're talking about a good, positive outcome. And yeah, so it'll be A. The sentence in line 60 to 63 primarily serves to 60 to 63. Okay, what is that sentence? Frank had an eye for the movies, then took in more than the action. Okay, so this basically talks about that he was not just going there for fun, but he was actually taking in a lot more than kids of his age would take, right? So that suggests that the movies shown at the theater are not of high quality. Identify a way to distinguish landscapes from other movie backgrounds. Convey that Frank applies understanding of artistic elements to other activities. Establish a contrast between Frank's perspective and the narrator's perspective, right? So it's clearly C, because this kind of brings us to the idea of his artistic sensibility and how he applies it even when he's watching a movie, and he tries to kind of look at different elements on the screen and not just the acting. Okay, based on the passage, a love of photography transforms Frank's grandfather's personality in which way? He becomes less impatient with members of his community. He becomes more enthusiastic about the war effort. He interacts with Frank on a more personal level. He takes a more generous view of Miss McGladdery. So it's very clearly C, right? It's written right here that his senatorial and grandparental aloofness disappeared on these expeditions, right? So he didn't really act like a grandfather when he was on these photography expeditions. So lines 84 to 86. Option D. The last paragraph mainly serves to, so this paragraph is, yeah, this kind of, as I said, brings out the contrast between Miss McGladdery and the grandfather. So underscore a contrast between Frank's grandfather and Miss McGladdery. Highlight the importance of art to Frank and his grandfather. Reveal Frank's grandfather's dissatisfaction with Miss McGladdery's teaching. Convey Frank's admiration for his grandfather's expertise, right? So it's A, right? Because Frank, it's from Frank's perspective, right? Frank feels that difference, and that is why he says that the way his grandfather approached photography was more artistic than the way Miss McGladdery taught. Okay, so let's grade this. I have the answer key for reading here. Questions 1 to 10. B, D, C, D, B, 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 D. Oh, okay. Question 2 is D. Let's mark that. We'll come back to this. Okay. B, D. C, D, B, C, D, B. Number 6, A, C, C, D, A. A, C, C, D, A. Okay. Question 2 was evidence for 1, right? He's committed to his work. Lines 14 to 18. Okay. He had learned the craft at home. Right. Okay. So, yeah, so I think this is a better answer than option A, because option A refers to his commitment in a general sense, right? That he was serious about it. But here, we have a very specific instance of how he's committed to art, that he had learned something at home and he was willing to apply that technique, even if it took more time than what Miss McGladdery had taught, right? So I think D is a better evidence than option A, because D is a more specific instance of his commitment than A, right? Okay, so that was the literature passage. Hope this exercise was useful. If it was, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you subscribe, because you will then receive notifications of future videos. So come back for those. I'll see you guys in another video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.